Dr. Margaret Paul is a best-selling author, relationship expert, and co-creator of the powerful inner bonding self-healing process, recommended by author Marcy Shimoff, actress Lindsay Wagner, and singer Alanis Morissette. She has appeared on numerous radio and television shows, including Oprah.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Margaret Paul here, co-creator of the powerful self-healing inner bonding process for learning how to love yourself. And today I want to talk about the underlying cause of racism. I've been thinking a lot about this since it's such a big issue today. And the one thing that I've come up with, which is what I really want to talk about, is that racism, when it comes really down to the bottom line, is projected self-loathing. So let me go back to talk about how this actually comes about. I'd like to share an experience that I had with you a number of years where I did a inner bonding weekend workshop in a prison with people, with men who had been recently released from prison for domestic violence, and they were invited to come and attend this workshop that I was giving, along with family members, with their wives who they had hurt, who they had beaten up, and also their parents. It was an extraordinary experience for me. And the bottom line with all of these men who had been beating up their wives were that they were physically abused in their households. And it was so interesting because some of the people who physically abused them were there. And I remember this one older man who had beaten up his son, who had just gotten out of prison for beating up his wife, and who was taking care of his grandson. And he came up to work, and he had heard what was going on. He had heard people talk about how they had gotten beaten up because they thought they were bad. They thought they were bad people. They thought they deserved to be beaten up. One of the men says, well, my mother was very loving. But then, of course, it turned out that she beat him up a lot. And he believed it was his fault because he was bad. So, of course, he had no love for himself. And then that got taken out on his wife and family. So this father got up with tears in his eyes. And he said, I'm so glad that I finally understand this, because I was about to beat up my grandson. They did not realize that this was physical abuse. They did not realize that it was causing their children, their grandchildren, to hate themselves, to see themselves as bad, as unworthy, as unlovable, and then to project that out onto others. In this case, these men were projecting it out onto their wives, onto their children. But the same thing happens with racism, in that people are brought up in families where they're abused. They're abused in many different ways. They're abused physically, emotionally, perhaps sexually abused. And they learn to loathe themselves. They learn to hate themselves. They learn to disconnect from who they really are inside, their true, beautiful soul essence. All of us have a soul that is a spark of the divine, that is a spark of love, because divine is love, and we are a part of that. Each of us is a part of that. Each of us has that inside of us. And when we get to know who we are inside, when we really see and value our incredibly beautiful soul essence, then we start to be able to see the soul essence of everyone, including animals, everything that's alive. We see the beauty within them. But when we disconnect from ourselves because of the abuse, and we don't learn to reconnect, then we continue to treat ourselves in the ways that we were treated. We continue to judge ourselves. We continue to beat ourselves up. And One of the things I've discovered is 4 major ways that most people learn to abandon themselves. It doesn't mean that they become overt racist, but just about everybody that I end up working with, they abandon themselves in maybe all of these 4 ways. So one of them is that we learn to stay up in our mind instead of our body. We had to learn to do this as kids, because if we were hurt, and most of us were in one way or another, childhood is not easy, whether it's from parents or siblings or teachers or peers, we get hurt and we get heartbroken, we get lonely, we lose people we love, we feel grief, we feel helpless over others. These are huge, deep feelings that when we're little, there's no way we can manage these unless we had parents who knew how to manage their deep feelings and taught us how to do that. Were there for us. But for so many of us, it was our parents that hurt us. And so one of the ways we learned to manage the pain was to disconnect from our bodies, because the feelings are in our body. And so we learned to go up in our mind, into our head, and to basically ignore what's going on inside. Well, ignoring our feelings is a form of self-abandonment. When we ignore our feelings, we might end up feeling anxious, depressed, empty, alone. Then maybe what we do is the second form, which is to judge ourselves. Most of us have learned to judge ourselves harshly. I haven't worked with anybody who didn't learn to judge themselves harshly. And I remember years ago when I finally realized that my anxiety and my depression was directly related to how I was judging myself so harshly. And I made a decision at that time to start to notice my self-judgments. Every time I felt anxious, I would notice, what am I telling myself? How am I treating myself that's causing me to feel this way? And I started to make the connection between my thoughts, these wounded thoughts of judgment, and how I was feeling. And of course, it was a challenge not to judge myself for judging myself. But it took me a good year of noticing my self-judgments before I stopped judging myself. And that was a turning point in my life, made a huge difference in my life. So when we judge ourselves, we are abandoning ourselves. We make ourselves feel bad, and then of course we ignore the feelings that we cause with our self-judgments. And then a third way is we may turn to various addictions to also numb out the feelings that we might be causing by ignoring our feelings and judging ourselves, or that might be caused by situations, people being unloving to us, and we don't know how to manage the pain of that. We've never learned to be compassionate with ourselves, to hold our pain with love and compassion instead of to ignore it, to judge it, or to numb it out with various addictions. So maybe you turn to food or alcohol or drugs or television or pornography or sex or the internet or social media. I mean, there's so many things we can turn to. Maybe it's work, maybe it's shopping and spending, maybe it's just making more and more money, maybe it's buying more and more things, trying to fill up from the outside the emptiness that we cause on the inside when we abandon ourselves. So in our society, we've got so many addictions that we can turn to numb out the pain that we might be causing with our abandonment, and that may be coming from others being unloving or from very challenging situations in our life, loss of people we love. We still, even if we're not causing those feelings, we're still responsible for learning to manage them with love and compassion. And so addictions, turning to addictions to numb out, is a third form of self-abandonment. And a fourth form is that we make other people responsible for our feelings. Basically, like, let's say your feelings are your inner child. And instead of you taking responsibility for them, you want to give that child away. I mean, imagine if you had an actual child and you kept trying to get somebody else to love the child and you didn't want to, that child would feel so rejected and abandoned. In fact, when children are adopted out, even if they're with loving parents, they still feel that sense of rejection from their birth parents. Well, when we do that to ourselves, when we make our partner or our parents or friends or somebody else responsible, that they have to give us attention, they have to approve of us, they have to see us and value us and give us the love that we're not giving to ourselves, what happens is that we feel very rejected and abandoned on the inner level. And the interesting thing is that no matter how much love somebody else might be giving you, if you're abandoning yourself in any of these four ways, it's not going to heal. It's not that other people's love isn't wonderful. It's not that it's not great to feel other people's love and approval, but it's got to be the icing on the cake, not the cake. Your love for yourself is the cake. And when you're abandoning yourself in any of these four ways, and I'm sure there's more, but these are the ones that I have found most people do, then you're going to feel that emptiness and aloneness. You're going to feel rejected on the inner level no matter what other people do. You're going to feel badly about yourselves. And then what happens when we've been abandoning ourselves and we feel so bad about ourselves and we don't know what to do with it? We often project it out. It's one of the things that our wounded ego has learned to do, is to project out, to deny what's happening on the inner level, deny our anger, deny our pain, and project it out on others. And this is what I see happening with racism, with sexism, with homophobia, that the people who are really overtly racist. I mean, we're all racist to a certain extent. Everybody who's white, if you've read White Fragility, you know everybody who's white has some racism that we need to deal with. And we need to be open to exploring that so that we don't participate in this white superiority that's so endemic in our society. But most of us, and most of you are going to be watching this, you're not overt racists. You're not deliberately trying to hurt Black people or Hispanic people or anybody who's different than you. But those people who are abandoning themselves, they loathe themselves. There's no way that they value themselves. They might puff up and be narcissistic about it and overtly say how terrific they are and how wonderful they are, but really, on the inner level, they don't like themselves. They don't like themselves at all. They don't value themselves. And so they're projecting that self-loathing out onto others. And this is the underlying cause of racism. So we can deal with it in lots of ways. But as long as people are abandoning themselves, they're going to be treating others the way they treat themselves, and they don't realize that they're treating themselves this way. So racism has to heal on a very deep level. People have to learn what it means to truly love themselves, and they don't know what that means. You know, it's not a hot bath. It's not getting your nails done. It's not just getting together with friends. That's not what loving yourself, I mean, that's fine. But loving yourself is about learning to take responsibility for your feelings. And it's learning to define your own self-worth. It's learning to see who you are in your soul essence. Now, this is a process. This is what I teach people to do. This is what I help people learn to do, is learn to see who they are, learn to define their beautiful self. This is what I had to learn to do. I came from a narcissistic family where I was yelled at, I was judged, I was put down, I was an only child, I was the scapegoat, I was projected on all the time. So I had to learn to see and value myself. I did not have parents who saw and valued me. And so I know that if I can learn to do this, so can you. Everybody can. I've worked with people who have been so horribly abused that you wonder how they even survived. But they have, and they learn to see and love and value themselves. And when they do, they learn to see the souls of everybody. They don't relate to people from how they look. They don't relate to people by the color of their skin. They relate to who they are in their soul, and they can feel that. When we can feel our own beautiful essence, it's so easy to feel the essence of others, even if they don't know who they are yet. It's so easy to do that. And it's so easy to be loving to people when we can feel and see their soul essence. So one of the things that's so important that I teach people all the time is to become aware of your intention. In the inner bonding process, there's only two intentions. One is the intention to learn about loving yourself, defining your worth, connecting with your spiritual guidance so that you can define your worth, because we can't see who we are through the eyes of our ego-wounded self. That's very distorted. We have to see who we are through the eyes of our higher self. And so the intention to learn to love ourselves and share our love with others, or the intention to protect against our pain with various forms of controlling, self-abandoning behavior. And it's important that all of us start to be aware that we have these two intentions at any given moment. In any moment, our intention is either to protect against our pain by avoiding our feelings, turning to addictions, making others responsible, judging ourselves, all forms of control, controlling other people, getting angry, giving ourselves up, resisting, withdrawing, blaming, so many ways that we have of trying to have control over getting love and avoiding pain and feeling safe. All of these forms of control hurt others and are abandoning to ourselves. They hurt us. So at any given moment, our intention is either to control and avoid our pain, avoid responsibility for ourselves, or our intention is to open to learning about how we might be creating our own pain, about taking loving care of the feelings that may be being caused by others' unloving behavior, open to learning about our false beliefs that we've all absorbed as we were growing up, open to learning about the truth, open to learning about what's loving to ourselves at any given moment. And all of us have the capacity to open to our higher source of love and truth. Now, this is not as hard as it may seem. It took me a lot of years to understand what it means to open to our higher selves. How do we connect? I wanted at-will spiritual connection. And it took me a long time to understand that it's about our frequency. It's about the rate at which we vibrate. When we can keep our frequency high, we can connect at will with our higher selves. We can tap into the truth. We can tap into what's loving to ourselves and what's loving to others. We can learn to define our own worth. We can learn to see our beautiful soul essence and the soul essence of others when we can connect with our higher selves, whatever that is for you. God, spirit, a master teacher, a guardian angel, the highest part of you. It doesn't matter what that is. That love and that truth is what the universe is. And when we learn to raise our frequency high enough, we can tap into that. And what I've learned is that it takes basically two things for us to raise our frequency high enough to access our higher guidance, to access our source of love and truth that is always, always here for each of us. The main thing that we need to do is be open to learning about loving ourselves and sharing our love with others. That is the most important thing in raising our frequency, is to be open to learning. When we open to learning, everything opens. Our chakras open, our mind opens, our heart opens, our soul opens, and that raises our frequency and enables us to connect. But the other thing that's vitally important, and that's especially important right now, with so much that's going on in our society, is how we feed ourselves. You know, our food supply has gotten so contaminated. When we eat food, when we eat factory farm food with pesticides and GMOs and food that's been grown on devitalized soil because of monocropping, when we eat ultra-processed food that's just filled with sugar and all the nutrients gone, when we eat produce that's been sprayed with pesticides, when we eat so much of what's in the market. I go up and down the shelves and I think, this is non-food. And when people eat this food, it's not natural to the body. And it's hard for the body to process it. And so it lowers our frequency. And if you want to have a high enough frequency to access your higher self so that you can learn to see who you really are inside and share your love with others, you've got to eat clean, non-processed, non-factory farmed foods. And this is so important right now, especially with COVID, so much illness, so much underlying illness. So much of this comes from the food we eat. I was really fortunate in that I was a sickly kid, and in my early 20s, I was so tired of being sick. I started reading about what creates health. I read The Poisons in Your Foods, and I read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and I learned what to do. I threw everything out of my kitchen and started to go to the one little health food store in Los Angeles at that time, and I got better. I didn't get all the way better until I learned inner bonding, because I didn't realize that stress also lowers the frequency and causes illness. And I was such a caretaker, giving myself up all the time, trying to take care of everybody else and not taking care of myself. So I eventually got quite ill, even though I was eating well. And then inner bonding, Spirit brought in inner bonding, and I learned to take loving care of myself. And that's when I got really, really healthy. And I still, after so many years of this, I have very high health and vitality, excellent health and vitality. And I'm able to have that at-will spiritual connection. And you can too. When you eat well, when you love yourself enough to be feeding yourself well, and when you love yourself enough to be open to learning about what is loving to you and about who you really are, then you're going to raise your frequency high enough. And it certainly helps in terms of frequency to be out in nature. Nature has a high frequency. To meditate, to pray, to be with other loving people, to do creative things, to be with animals. There's so many things that can help raise your frequency. But if you're not open to learning, and if you're not feeding your body well, you can do all these other things, and it won't raise your frequency high enough to have that at-will spiritual access. Because I've worked with people who have meditated for years and even eaten well for years, but without that intention to learn about loving yourself, without healing all this self-abandonment, without really being focused on what's loving to you and defining your worth and sharing your love with others, your frequency won't be high enough. But everybody can learn to do this. I wasn't born particularly gifted at accessing my higher guides. I had to learn it. And I teach this to people all the time. This is so essential in healing racism. Because when you learn to connect with your higher guidance, then you learn to bring that love inside. And then you learn to see who you are in your soul, regardless of how you were treated as you were growing up. regardless of how much you were abused, regardless of how much you were judged, neglected, abandoned. I work with people who were just so abused as they were growing up, but they learned to see who they are in their essence through learning to connect with their higher guidance. This is what's so vitally important right now. This is what's going to heal so many of the problems in our society. We can do all sorts of outer things, and we have to do as much as we can on the outer level to heal these huge problems in our society. But we have to do the work on the inner level, the work of learning to love ourselves, learning to see who we are in our soul essence, so that we can see who everybody is. If you were to be able to see the essence of everybody you meet, there's no way that you could harm anybody. There's no way you could harm animals. The people who run the factory farms are so cruel to animals, it's just horrible. They do this because they've abandoned themselves. They create an emptiness inside, and that emptiness leads to greed. They want more, they want more, they want more. And so they build these factory farms, and they build these corporations that harm our atmosphere. So much of our global warming is coming from these factory farms. If you do the research, you will see that. And it's coming from their greed, because they create emptiness when they abandon themselves, and they don't realize that the only true way of filling ourselves is by learning to love ourselves and connect with our higher source of love, our higher source of truth. This is what fills us. And when we fill ourselves up with love, we cannot do harm. We cannot harm the planet. We cannot harm animals. We cannot harm others. So I want to encourage you to recognize that the real change has to come about from inside each of us. We each need to be willing to do our inner work, whatever that is for you, to learn to see and value and love yourself, to learn to share your love with others, to learn to connect with your higher source of love and wisdom and truth. Today, I don't do anything without asking my higher guidance, well, is this what's in my highest good? I want to encourage you all to even start asking, even if you don't feel that connection, what's in my highest good right now? What's loving to me right now? Even just asking the question might start to pop ideas into your mind about loving yourself. And the more you do this, the more you're going to create that connection. Actually, this is what creates new neural pathways in the higher brain, the prefrontal cortex. I've had people, I work with so many people who practice inner bonding and say, my brain is changing. And that's what happens whenever we focus on something for a period of time. We create new neural pathways in the brain. And we want to create new neural pathways for what we call in inner bonding the loving adult. The loving adult is who we are. When we're loving ourselves, we're loving others, we're taking loving action. We're feeding ourselves well. We're treating other people with love. We see who we are and we see who they are. So I want to encourage you to learn and practice inner bonding along with so many other things that are available today. I hope you go to innerbonding.com and take our free 7-day inner bonding course. It's a great way to start to learn to love yourself. It's not the only way. There are many ways. There's so many people that you're hearing that are sharing their wisdom with you. And I hope you learn from all of them. But this is a very, very powerful way of learning to love yourself. So I do hope that you take advantage of it. I send all of you love and blessings for health and well-being.